Well, hello. Today I am starting a new series. So I'm going to be doing book reviews, and this isn't going to stick to one genre. I'll be all over the place and work out the kinks as I go. One of the kinks, I got to figure out what to call this series. So I'm thinking about pens right because I got to tie it to the fountain pen somehow. And you know, how do books come to be? Somebody's got to write them. So we'll try that. And I figure fountain pen people and pen people in general, book people, are open to new ideas and new thoughts, even if they're not necessarily their own. So I think this will be fun. And like I said before, this will be a new adventure for me. So one thing I will say for all of these books, I will try not to do major spoilers. I may have to do some mild spoilers or spoilers of certain things in the book, but I will try really hard not to do too many spoilers. But just in case, spoiler alert. So today I want to talk to you about Song of Kali, which is Dan Simmons' first book, which he published in 1985. And one of the questions that came to my mind, and apparently some other people's minds right away, was, is it xenophobic? Yeah, kinda. I think he's gotten a lot better about other cultures than he was since this one. I just have to wonder, reading this book, what did Calcutta do to him? Because he does not have much good to say about the place. The action actually takes place in the 1970s. As I said, the copyright date is 1985. But anyway, I would guess that he probably worked on it for several years. So, something happened to him in the 70s in Calcutta. And I will also say that representations of Calcutta from this book, which is no longer called Calcutta, it's now, and I'm going to butcher this, Calcutta, trying to more match the local pronunciation. Calcutta was created by English colonists who just decided, let's make it sound like one of our cities, even though it's not our country. We're just colonizing a place where people already live. So, and Calcutta, as it's called in the book, has a long history of colonization. So, it's called Song of Kali, and the first sentence in the book kind of sets the theme for the whole thing. Some places are too evil to be allowed to exist. So, can a place be evil? I know there are places where I will get a bad vibe from them. Does it mean they're evil, or just kind of, not really in my comfort zone here, dude? But it is an evil place is a natural part of horror, so I can understand that. And it's this whole book, what I found interesting is it's very natural horror. Yes, there are supernatural elements, but they can all be explained away as being caused by people or various chemicals. So, one of the things that comes up right away, we've got a white man in what is to him an alien culture. Now, his wife is Indian, just not from Calcutta. She's from, I want to say New Delhi. I didn't write it down, but she does not speak the local language because in this area they speak more Bengali. And she has Hindi and I think Punjabi, Russian, and French and English because she's a smart woman. She also is a mathematician. But they also have a daughter who's 7 months old. And, for a baby in a book, she develops quite a little personality. And I say that not to be condescending, but really, what does a baby do in a book? Other than lay there and, 7 months old, she's not even walking around yet. The protagonist in the book, I kept wanting to call him Robert Luchak, but it's actually Lusak. He is a writer, and he was asked to go to Calcutta on reports that Indian poet M. Das has resurfaced after many years with a new work. It turns out later he was the third choice for this, and the only reason they picked him is because he has an Indian wife and they figured she could translate for him. But the two first choices turned down this assignment. And again, they weren't aware that she doesn't speak Bengali, which is the language around Calcutta. And you hear about this, my question, did he have a bad experience there? Almost right away as they fly into the airport, I might mispronounce this. I want to say Dum Dum, but it might be Doom Doom. I don't know. And I should have looked it up. That was my fault. But they fly into the airport, and the flight was delayed because of a disagreement between the pilot and the flight engineer. So we're already trying to set a little bit of a scene here. And then it describes the city as having a, quote, almost fungal phosphorescence. The airport is crowded, which is apparently still a problem. And Mr. Chatterjee, who was supposed to meet them, is missing. But a young man named M.T. Krishna greets them, and they just kind of assume he was sent by Mr. Chatterjee. And he immediately stirs up trouble with three porters. They want to tip, 10 rupees to these porters. He says, nope, that's too much. And he gives one of the 5 rupee notes back to Mr. Luzak and just gives one to the 3 porters. Well, if you know math, you see the problem, and the porters do too. How are we supposed to divide this? Well, the protest starts bringing on more porters and more beggars who all start banging on the bus. Climbing the bus, one porter has got his face pressed up against the window. He's badly burned and, oh, by the way, missing his tongue. And then they drive. And again, just the details. And I'm not going to give you all the details through the whole book. I'm just kind of my first thesis is he's trying to make this seem like an evil place. It talks about streets flooded 2 to 3 feet deep with water. It talks about a frail man pulling a heavy cart who had to leap aside as the bus roared past him, and here's the quote. A frail man pulling a heavy cart had to leap aside as our bus roared past, throwing a curtain of water across him and his load. There's a interjection for no reason of a boy standing on a crate swinging around what looks like a dead cat, but then they realize it's a dead rat by its tail. And for some reason, Mr. Luzak gets angry about the fact that the interior lights in the bus are on. And I thought it was unreasonable. I didn't get it unless they're trying to show that he has a temper, but I don't know. It just seemed to come out of nowhere. Now, as it turns out through the book, Amrita, who's his wife, turns out to be the rock in their relationship. The more reasonable one, the smarter one, the stronger one. And like I said, I enjoyed the characterization of Victoria, even though I'm not much of a baby lover. And the times in the motel where they stay, or I should say hotel, become kind of a partial respite. Although even there, signs of what's going on appear, like the electricity being out, how hot and muggy it is, which, it is there. I'm not going to hold that against Mr. Simmons. It's hot and muggy in that part of India. But the next day, Luzak finally meets up with Mr. Chatterjee of the Bengali Writers Union. They talk about getting the manuscript to him from M-DOS, but they're very mysterious about how they got it, and really cagey about his whereabouts. And while they discuss whether to let him have it or not, he's asked to wait outside. And he's sitting on kind of this waiting room, watching motion in a shadow that turns out to be a rat. So again, we're trying to show decay everywhere. So they agree to get the manuscript to him, and they talk about how they'll get it to him. And so he goes on back to the motel where he meets up with Mr. Krishna, who'd picked him up at the airport. And by now he's figured out, okay, Mr. Krishna is not part of the Writers Union, but for whatever reason he keeps hanging with him. And Mr. Krishna says, hey, I have a student who you need to meet who has met M-DOS. So he's like, okay, because that's his goal, is to meet this M-DOS and write a whole story around these poems, because apparently in the 1970s you could make money doing that and get a trip to India funded. So this student tells a long, long tale that takes about 2 chapters, but the long and short of it is, the student had met up with some followers of the goddess Kali, who is on the cover of the book, Song of Kali. And if you know about Kali, she's either blue-skinned or black-skinned, depending on the artist, has lots of arms. In this book, they describe her as having 4. And she's all kinds of fun. She's the goddess of time, doomsday, and death. Often she's portrayed as as being naked, having a long tongue, having a skirt/girdle of arms. Yeah. And a necklace made of human heads, and at least one head in her hands. Well, anyway, you've probably heard about the Thuggee. They were a group of Kali followers who the British wiped out, who liked to rob and kill travelers. So, yeah, they're just a sweet group. And I am not sure what was going on with the Indiana Jones movie with that cult. I think it was inspired by this, but really went out there. And then, of course, may have seen the Cary Grant movie Gunga Din, which also explores this part of it. And yeah, the British colonization does hang heavily over this tale. You keep hearing about old British buildings and things from the colonial era. But the student tells about getting involved with this cult that is worshiping Kali. They've got a statue to her and everything. And then him and his friend are told to bring back a body next time. And it's at about that point that he realizes that his friend had originally planned for him to be the body that his friend brought. But they decide to go get one more honestly, if there is such a thing. So they go to this kind of mass graveyard. In India, as is in the news right now, they incinerate corpses. But for whatever reason they've gotten behind, so there's a lot of bodies laying out. And he finds a body sewn up in a bag. So he grabs that one. His friend grabs another one. And they take it back to Kali. His body turns out to have been drowned, and it's all the gross things that happen when a body drowns, and very chewed up. But what's wild is they perform a whole ceremony, and these 2 bodies come back to life. And finally, Mr. Lusak says, "Okay, but what does this have to do with the poet M. Das?" And the student says, "Well, the body was that of M. Das." Okay. That's kind of horrifying. Now, you go back a little bit. M. Das disappeared shortly after his father's funeral. What they say he did is he just gave away all of his worldly possessions and decided to live among the people. He goes on to relate more because later on, they finally get a chance to meet him. So here's what happens. What they have to do to meet him is give away a bag of 50-cent pieces at the rail station, which is another very crowded place now and then. And they are almost killed by desperate people trying to get this money. But in the midst of that, he finds the manuscript has been laid there, and in it instructions for how to meet up with M. Das. Looking at the poetry, it is very dark poetry. But he finally meets Mr. Das, and I don't think that's the spoiler, because I think you knew that he was going to meet him at some point. The spoiler comes later, which I'm not going to give you the spoiler. Mr. Das is very corroded and eaten up by leprosy, and or possibly a time in the river, and he says that he already had leprosy at the time of his father's funeral. And that's part of what made him decide on the path he took. They end up actually having 2 meetings. It's after the second meeting that Mr. Lusak is abducted. He's locked up somewhere and has a kind of horrifying encounter with the goddess Kali in the dark, scrambling around on her arms and her tongue chasing after him and stuff. But he gets away. And anyway, meanwhile, during all of this, he has this horrifying race through the back streets of Calcutta, the alleys. They are described as full of trash and sewage, and it's just a mess. he finally gets back to the hotel to find out that his daughter, and that's why they gave her personality, has been kidnapped. Now, I won't spoil that part. But what I will note, the novel ends up spending a lot of time, a lot more than they often do, on the recovery. And I felt that was the right note, because it's just this building horror there in Calcutta. And then they get, their daughter is kidnapped, their 7-month-old daughter. And it's just not an easy thing to get past. So, they spend a lot of time dealing with the recovery. But one of the things that comes up is this guy decides that the goddess Kali is evil. He actually tries to make a return to Calcutta he finds out that this MDOS is still alive, and he wants to kill him, basically, but in the end he decides not to. He decides to put all behind him, and there are other songs out there, and he burns the manuscript from MDOS, and that's that. I'll be honest, if this was my first Dan Simmons novel, I don't think I'd pick up another one. I mean, it's very atmospheric and very dark. You can see a lot of the beginnings of what he later developed. But wow, they're beginnings. It's not that great of a novel. And is Calcutta evil? I have a problem with that. So, yeah, probably not the best novel for me to start this whole series off with. But there you go. So read it as a Dan Simmons completist. Read it if you want atmospheric horror. But it was kind of mean-spirited, and I didn't like its portrayal of Calcutta. Now, you do that with a fictional place, go nuts. But this is a real place. So you got to have more respect for the place, is what I think. So, read it if you're a Dan Simmons completist, but don't feel like you really need to read it, because it held my attention. I will say this, the last part really screams along, and I've told you before, I'm not a night person, but when I finished it, I looked over at my alarm clock, and it was 3:10 a.m. So yes, it does hold your attention once it gets going. But the first bit is just kind of, okay. So, hope that was helpful. I will try to do a better book for next time. And, well, thank you for watching. We'll talk to you later. Bye-bye.